through and intersects two or more other lines, we call that first line a transversal. It cuts across these two other lines. And when it does that, several angles pairs are formed, as you can see. And depending on where those angle pairs are, they have a specific name. So, for example, let's just go ahead and go through each one of these and see an example of each one, and then we'll go ahead and take a look at how to identify these kinds of angles in a diagram. So, first up, we have corresponding angles. An example of corresponding angles, I'll use red to kind of trace these out, are the angles that they labeled 2 and 6. Think of corresponding angles as sort of being angles in the same position where the transversal intersects. So, for example, this is sort of in the upper right position of these 4 angles up here. And then same down here, that angle sort of in the upper right position. There are other pairs of corresponding angles formed. If we kind of go through this, we've got this angle and this angle would be examples of corresponding. They're in the same position. And then there are 2 more. There's this angle right here, the yellow one, would match up to this angle down here. And finally, the last set of corresponding angles are right there. Corresponding angles have the most pairs. There's 4 pairs of them formed. Next up are alternate interior angles. Let's start with the word interior. Interior is going to mean it's between these 2 other lines, like inside of those. I think of them as like sandwich buns or hamburger buns or something. And the angles are going to be in between there. The alternate part refers to which side of the transversal it's on. So as you can see, we've got one angle on the right of the transversal and one on the left. So there's alternate interior angles. And of course, there's a second pair if we switch colors. We've got this alternate interior angle and this alternate interior angle. Okay. Next up are alternate exterior. Well, alternate is going to refer to that same idea of one angle will be on the left of the transversal, one will be on the right. Exterior means it's outside of these lines, outside of the hamburger bun. So on the left and on the right, there's my alternate exterior angles. And as you're probably guessing, there's a second set of alternate exterior right there and right there. And finally, we have the consecutive interior angles, or sometimes you'll see them referred to as same side interior, because as the name says, these will be on the same side of the transversal. They are interior angles, meaning they'll be in between the 2 lines. Same side just means on the same side of the transversal. So angle 3 and 5 are same side interior or consecutive interior, as well as the angles on the right-hand side. So the orange angles would be consecutive interior. All right, let's go ahead and take a look at identifying pairs of angles. So we can see another diagram. We have 2 lines cut by a transversal. Now the transversal is going roughly horizontally in this case, so if it helps you, turn your paper so you can see this a little bit better if you need to. But let's go ahead and identify all the pairs of each one of these types of angles. So let's start with corresponding angles. Remember, those were angles in the same position, so I'm just going to kind of go in order and start with angle 1. If I think of angle 1 as being in the upper left section of these angles right here, I'll match it up to the upper left section right there, so I can see that 1 and 5 are examples of corresponding angles. Next up, if I kind of just keep going around the diagram, I'm going to move to the upper right section. I'll match it up to the upper right section here, so 2 and 6 must be corresponding angles. And then finally, we'll do the same on the bottom. So angle 3 is in the lower left, angle 7 is in the lower left, so I'll match those 2 up. And finally, remember I said there's 4 pairs of corresponding angles. 4 and 8 are also going to match up. So there's all 4 sets of the corresponding angles. Let's erase some of this so it's not so messy, and go through and find our other types as well. So next up, they want to find alternate exterior angles. So first of all, there's my 2 lines again. Exterior is going to refer to the fact that I'm outside, so I'm only looking at these angles on the outside of those lines. So alternate means opposite sides, so one above and one below the transversal. So if I take angle 1 as being above, that's going to match up to angle 8, which is below. And then finally, our second set is going to be angle 3 and angle 6. Okay. Next up are the alternate interior angles. So again, I'm only looking at a certain or a couple certain angles or particular angles. I want to be inside those lines, so these are the 2 angles I'm looking at that are between the 2 lines interior. Alternate, once again, refers to one on one side of the transversal, one on the other. So 2 and 7 could work, and finally 4 and 5 could work as my other set. And then last but not least, we have our consecutive interior, or same side interior, you might see that called. So again, I'm only looking at angles 2 and 4 and 5 and 7 for the ones that are interior. I want them to be on the same side of this transversal, so both above or both below. So I can see that 2 and 5 fit that scenario, as well as 4 and 7. Okay, and then last up, let's take a look at identifying the types of angle pairs shown. So we want to come up with one of those 4 names to describe these angles. We'll take a look at where your angles are located, what side of the transversal they're on, and we shouldn't have too much of a problem with this. Remember, your transversal is the line that cuts across, so there's my transversal. I can see that both of my angles in this first example, 4 and 5, are interior. So I know I've got at least one of the interior angles, and I can see that they are on opposite sides of the transversal. One's on the left, one's on the right. So that must tell me I've got, come on pen, I've got alternate interior angles in this first example. Next up, again, if it helps, kind of trace over these lines to see them better. There's my transversal. I can see that I've got exterior angles. They're outside of my 2 lines. And one's above, one's below the transversal, so I have another alternate. And since they were exterior, we'll say alternate exterior angles. And finally, again, if it helps you turn your paper so that your transversal is going roughly vertically, this time it's going horizontally. If that confused you, like I said, turn your paper. Otherwise, I'm going to take a look at what kind of angles I have. Well, they're not interior or exterior because one is inside the lines and one is outside the lines, so I can't worry about that. But I can tell they're sort of in the same position. This is in the upper left section of those 4 angles, and this one as well is in the upper left section. So what that tells me is I must have an example of corresponding angles.